Dave. Dave Michaels.
Good morning, MZ.
Hi, Dave Michaels. Is this a typical day? A typical day in the Dave Cave?
Oh, it's a fantastic day out at the Dave Cave, MZ.
Deals that'll make you...
Deals that'll make you squeal.
Yeah.
Twice.
Wow.
Yes, you can go squeal.
I've never heard that before.
We've never done anything like this before, MZ. Today is a day to stop by the Dave Cave. I'm excited because I finally have everything ready. Everything's on the shelves. I stayed late last night. Everything is prepared. Come on down, man. We've got everything organized. It looks beautiful out there. It's great.
Wow.
Yes, I'm in the mood. So stop by. I'll be out there today until 4 p.m., I believe. I don't know, at least till 2. Give me a call, 218-KSCO. You can call or text that number if you're looking for longevity products with deals that'll make you squeal. That's the number you want to call. 218-5726. If you cannot spell, that's 218-KSCO.
Did the big shipment come in?
The big shipment came in.
Oh, that's why you were here till all hours of the night.
So we've got Arthrodex, we've got OsteoFX, we've got the Brain and Heart Pack, we've got the Digestive Pack, the Blood Sugar Pack, the Bone and Joint Pack. We've got everything that you could want, MZ. We've got stuff for your garden, stuff for your laundry, stuff for your cat, stuff for your yak. I mean, whatever. We don't care. We've got something for you at great prices, MZ.
That's
today.
fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, great. So here we go with the opening of the Saturday special. If I can remember how to do this, I think it's 3, 2, 1.
Good morning. A brighter day is here. Good morning. May we bring you cheer.
We've got time, we've got tunes, we've got time, tunes, and temperature.
Get up and go, it's today, you know, on KSCO Radio.
Did you hear that? Get up and go, it's today, you know. I've gotten up and I'm going because it's today, you know. Welcome to hour number 1 of the KSCO Saturday Special on your favorite radio station. KSCO AM 1080, FM 104.1, FM 95.7, and FM 107.9. And KSCO.com and our app. Stay with us.
Good morning. Now stay right here on KSCO Radio.
Now, this isn't just your garden variety Saturday special. It's a special Saturday special. Okay, Eric, Dr. Eric Wattenburg.
Just because we have nothing better to do at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning.
Welcome back to KSCO. It's been, let's see, 6 months, approximately 6 months since you were on with us before. We were just talking about that. You're down in you're in the area, and you let me know that you would be here, and that was my cue to get you back on to talk about all kinds of things since the last time, not the least of which is the fires. Now, your dad, the smartest man in the world, Dr. Bill, among many other things, had some very, very strong feelings about how environmentalism is sort of destroying our world when they sort of want it to be the other way around, or having just the reverse effect. And now we have proof of that, right?
He warned everybody for 40 years this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, you have to be careful where you start all of this. But, you know, currently our national forests are dictated by the courts and mismanaged by the Forest Service. And it is just abysmal, the condition our forests are in. And this is what we said would happen 40 years ago. When you stop all involvement in the forest for all intents and purposes, there'd been some logging going on, but we've been raping every other country around the world for all of our lumber needs for 40 years now, and letting our own forests just degenerate into a big pile of brush. And then you get a fire like this in a drought season, and we've had many years of drought now. This is kind of back to the 1970s again. When I was a kid, this is the last time I remember this much of a drought and the lakes being this low.
Right.
You can't stop these fires. All you can do is try to steer them a little bit, protect some structures if you're lucky. And unfortunately, Dr. Bill's hometown of Greenville, California, became national news when it burned. It looks like Hiroshima. And I've been up there 3 times now.
As recently as yesterday, right?
I just came down from there yesterday. I was there for the 2 weeks preparing our property for this possibility. And then
how did you do that?
We have selectively logged that. We have 160 acres of forest just immediately adjacent to the town of Greenville, literally. And the fire roared over the hill on August 2nd and made a beeline right for our property. And because of the logging activities we've done and the thinning and, keeping the place fire safe over the last 50 years, when the fire came down to our property, it just dropped on the ground and did a nice, clean underburn. Then the Cruz came. This was the first day on August 2nd. The town burned on August 4th.
Okay.
So when I got news that the fire, after 2 weeks of just sitting up on top of the mountain above us and really looking like it was ready to go out and they had it under control, it blew up on them and obviously was just uncontrollable. And a finger of fire came over the mountain, down the ridge, downhill, right at our property, and then it just sat on the ground and did a nice underburn. The crews came around, finished the underburning, had 2 days to prep this and about another mile of forest beneath and adjacent to us. And then 2 days later, when the winds kicked up and burned the town of Greenville, it burned around us. It didn't burn out that other mile of forest and some homes that they had done the prep on, but it took out everything else.
Like all the other homes, all the businesses. I mean, I've been to Forest Lodge, and it's an amazing place. And there was a town.
There is no town
adjacent
now.
to it.
It looks like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. People don't realize the atomic bomb didn't destroy the cities. It was the fire because of the bombing that destroyed the cities. And this little town of Greenville looks everything like Hiroshima. And I'm
that's
sure
that's where you grew up, right?
I did. We moved back there when I was 8, but my grandfather moved his family, my dad and aunt, in the 1930s, logging and mining. We're 4 generations deep in that community. There are some other families even deeper than we are. Indian Valley itself is one of the most beautiful high mountain valleys you've ever seen. The valley is fine. The immediate little strip of trees from a few hundred yards around the perimeter of the valley has been preserved, I think, largely because of firefighting efforts. I mean, our firefighters have done a huge job in trying to protect what they could. But when it came roaring down on August 4th with the winds and blew right through town, it spared nothing in town.
God.
There are a few homes, like I said, on the periphery of the valley.
Like paradise down the road, huh?
It very, very similar to it. In fact, a lot of the crews now that are up evaluating the town and starting the cleanup process were just kind of coming off the Paradise Fire. It takes years to complete the recovery process and clean up and getting back to some normalcy. In this town, this is going to take decades. There's nothing left.
So the reason things are so intense and seemingly so different now, there was always a fire season, especially around September, October, when
we'd have 4,000 and 5,000 acre fires. Every year there'd be a plot that would burn somewhere, but that was back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. We still had logging activities going on,
and there have been a number of droughts in that 30 or 40 year period. I specifically remember the drought around 76 or so.
Yep.
So what is different? It seems to be much more intense now.
It's everything.
What do you think?
It is. The climate's been warming for 10,000 years, so we've got that going on. We have a horribly mismanaged forest that has been allowed to just grow unabated with no activity in it, no fire, very little logging, no grazing. And when you allow Mother Nature to grow like that, you have fires down here on the coastal range. I mean, we drove over through Ben Lomond last night, and I look at that terrain up there, and I shudder to think what is going to happen if a fire starts in there. It's very thick. It's very dry. It will just burn like tinder. It'll be another Oakland Hills fire if anything ever starts.
Yeah.
And people need to realize we now have, unfortunately, my dad's property, Forest Lodge, probably will become some sort of an institute for the study of wildfire and how to survive that. There's an adjacent piece of property. It's an old mill site that we own as well, which did not burn. But there's a house on the back of that, and the lady has a herd of about 50 goats that everybody around her has allowed her to just kind of let them go free range. They walk up across the road, the tracks, they go into everybody's yard. But they have eaten down all of the grass and the brush, and not one part of that burned. The fire came right up to that and just fell on the ground and fizzled out. So until we can put the national forest back into a state of balance, which is going to mean thinning, harvesting, and reintroducing fire into it, we cannot just walk away from it, or this is what you get. So Smokey the Bear, a great icon, only you can prevent a forest fire. Well, starting back in the 20s and 30s, when we started putting out all the fires, that's when the problem started. Logging can help thin it, thinning and brush treatment can help, but really fire is an integral part, and it's just not been allowed to do its thing for the last 100 years, and we can't just let it go back in and reintroduce itself at this point, because this is what you get. You get total destruction.
Did Dr. Bill get into trouble with some government agency around this whole topic?
We didn't get into trouble. He certainly stirred it up.
Yeah.
He grew up in the logging woods. His father was what they called a gyppo logger, just a one-man show, one truck, one tractor, haul out a load or two of logs a day. But the woods used to be full of these small loggers who had small little jobs. And it got to the point in the 1970s and 80s, the Forest Service would not even let these loggers go out and harvest dead trees. We had businesses that were able to make lumber out of dead trees, and the Forest Service wouldn't let you go do it. 20 years, 30 years ago, the Forest Service started citing people, by gosh, for going out and cutting a dead tree for firewood. If they didn't cut that tree out of this little deck that the Forest Service put up in some area, if they happened to go 10 feet off of the road, people were given citations for cutting some firewood where the Forest Service said you could not cut it. Ridiculous. And so with all of this prohibition on harvesting anything out of the forest other than what the Forest Service dictates you can take, and the logging sales they approved the way they did it, it was just abysmal as well. I mean, they created huge eyesores out there. The loggers doing the logging didn't like to do what they were told to do, but the Forest Service was dictating which trees you'll take, how you'll take them, where we're going to take them from. So if you don't like what you see in the forest now, blame the Forest Service, not the logging industry.
One of your dad's favorite expressions for people for whom he had nothing but contempt was, do you know?
I know a lot of expressions
he had. It starts with B. Blubber butt.
He had a lot of choice words for describing these fat cats and idiots.
But he struck me as a guy who just did what he knew was right, and to hell with the government.
Well,
and that's why I said, didn't he get into trouble? And you said, no, he stirred up a lot.
I'm not sure that there was ever a legal case. My grandfather...
I don't mean a legal case. I'm just talking about a citation or something.
No, I'm not aware that we were ever cited. We did everything, officially and above board. My grandfather, they tried to throw him in prison for what they said was stealing Christmas trees. Now, all of you think harvesting Christmas trees is the wrong thing to do around Christmas time. Do you realize all of the Christmas trees, that is exactly the brush and the small understory that needs to be cleared out. If you let those small trees, Christmas trees, 10 and 12 feet tall, grow, when a fire comes through, it burns those Christmas trees. Those light on fire like a big candle and a torch, and that is what allows the fire to get up into the bigger trees, and then you have a crown fire and you lose your entire forest. So this concern that people had about, oh my gosh, we are destroying the forest by harvesting Christmas trees, is exactly the wrong thought to have. You should be thankful that we are harvesting Christmas trees, these little brushy trees, out from under the bigger trees. And I can show you now, it is easy to see. Any highway you drive around Plumas County now, because of this Dixie fire, you will see areas that survived. The only areas that survived this fire were the managed forests that the lumber companies had, because they had been doing exactly what we did on our small tree farm, which is selectively going through, cutting out trees for profit. You got to pay for this. It doesn't come free. But you cut some trees for timber and lumber use. You selectively harvest. I mean, it's this whole sustainable, culture that we're in now. How many products do you see that say, that I ate a chocolate bar the other day, or a cookie that had chocolate chips in it, and they made the statement the cocoa in these chocolate chip cookies was sustainably sourced. Don't forget about the forests. 100 years from now, maybe we can walk away from them once we have put it back into balance. But all of the idiots out there that forced this spotted owl, no harvest, get out of the forest policy on us 40 years ago, this is what you get. Go up and look at Plumas County. 2/3 of that county has burned now, and it's the size of Rhode Island. Last year, we had the North Complex, which completely devastated the whole middle fork of the Feather River from its source all the way down to Lake Oroville. That burned out the southern part of the county. This year, the Dixie Fire started on the North Fork of the Feather River. I was there. This is so uncanny, it makes me shiver. I get goosebumps right now. My wife and I were in Greenville. We stopped over for the night from Oregon on our way down to the Central California coast to pick up a horse. My sister was there. We spent the night, dropped off a few things, and we headed down the Feather River Canyon. And that fire started halfway down the canyon at what's called the Cresta Dam. It's one of the PG&E power dams in the canyon there. We stopped, literally, took pictures. The helicopters were just starting to fight that fire at that point. They had 3 helicopters dipping water out of the dam and the reservoir and trying to put the fire out on this hill slope. And we drove on down. We thought, no big deal. We get little fires. It'll be fine. That was, I think, July 13th. We are now at what, August 5th? September.
September, yeah.
Yeah, so that fire has been burning for over 6 weeks, and it will not stop until it runs out of fuel now. It is so big, there is no way they can put this out intentionally. They're going to have to meet it in places where it just runs out of fuel. It is now burning into old burns that burned over the last few years, and that's the only way it has slowed down. It just runs out of fuel. This fire
there's so much fuel. I mean, maybe it won't, from what you're saying, if it's correct, this fire might not be out for months.
It will go out when Mother Nature puts it out. November, December, depending on when the rains finally come in, or it runs out of fuel. It is now burning, I'm going to say 100 miles north from where it started. It is now past Mount Lassen. It is approaching Bernie, and it will head to Mount Shasta if it wants to. It will burn until it runs out of fuel. That is the shame of it all. And could it have been prevented? Who knows? I mean, we get fires all the time. Apparently, this was started by a downed tree that hit a power line. So PG&E is going to be on the hook for this one, just like the Paradise Fire. But fires start all the time. We used to be able to put these out very quickly because what would happen is all the loggers, if we saw fire, we would drop everything we were doing, load up our dozers and our equipment and our water trucks, and go put the dang thing out the first day we saw the smoke. Now the Forest Service lets them burn because, by gosh, we've got to allow Mother Nature to do its natural thing. And if you let them get too big, they create their own weather. They create their own winds. They throw up embers that fly miles ahead of the main fire and start spot fires. So the fire just doesn't burn as a front in a continuous way. It flares up. It throws hot embers. And we've got black charred embers laying in places that did not burn in the fire. I mean, it will throw embers for miles ahead. Those drop into the needles and the fuels. They start a fire there. So you've got a new fire miles ahead of the main fire. It gets hot. The main fire catches up to it, and this thing just leapfrogs. There is no way you can make a fire line big enough to stop it. It just throws embers right over anything you try to do. So,
people know I have a dear friend named Dr. Joel Wallach for, more than a quarter of a century now, and as such, I have the honor of being a sounding board for Doc. And he happened to call me this morning. He didn't know anything about this show. And he called me this morning very excited that he wanted to share with me, or at least alert me to the fact that he's figured out some pretty interesting information about the source of these fires that are so different from all the others. And I said, stop, Doc. We're going to be doing a program with Dr. Eric Wattenburg, MD, this morning. He just happens to be in the area, and we had planned this a week or two ago. And so this is a topic that we need to adopt, we need to devote at least a whole show to. But I asked Doc if he would just spend a few minutes with us to give us a little tease about what his thoughts are about that. So we want to do that right now. We want to bring on Doc here. I got to make the equipment do its thing here. Dr. Wallach, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Say hello to Dr. Eric. I mean, you've talked to Eric before, and Eric's talked with you
His
before.
father, yeah.
Yeah, good morning, Doc.
Good morning, sir. I really appreciated your discussion. Thank you so much for your wisdom.
So yeah, in a nutshell, if that's possible, Doc, like we're going to have to do whole programs on what you're talking about now, but can you give us a tease here?
Okay, a little short version goes like this. Oh, I'm hearing an echo. Okay. Anyway, it turns out that the reason why they're having a hard time putting out this fire around Lake Tahoe, when they were going to evacuate 22,000 people, it was a big mess and blah, 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 is because there's an oxygen storm. There's an oxygen storm, hyperproduction of oxygen. That's why these fires that Dr. Wattenberg discussed, where the fires are up in the crown of the trees, there's big balls of fire 50 foot above the tree, that's actually the air burning, okay? And people have to understand what's going on here. Okay, what happens is, when you have this hyperproduction of oxygen, I used to spend a lot of time as an Eagle Scout and an Explorer Scout in Missouri with the forest rangers putting out fires every fall. You know, they get our Troop 495, we would go put out fires. So I know what forest fires look like. And Dr. Wattenberg said it correctly, that most forest fires, you get this floor burn where the underbrush is burning, and it's easy to put out. So what's the difference here? Well, Lake Tahoe was formed 100,000 years ago. It was formed by two glaciers meeting during the glacial period, and they formed a moraine, which is the dam that's made by the glaciers. And this moraine formed, and it's been leaking silt and minerals and stuff into the lake since the moraine was formed. These glaciers interrupted flows of water and creeks and everything, and they came together and formed this huge moraine, this huge dam, and all this water went a certain direction and created what's now Lake Tahoe. Now, right now we have a huge algal bloom in Lake Tahoe. That happens every once in a while in Lake Tahoe, a huge algal bloom. Now, there's three things about algae. Number one, it needs light, so it always is found in shallow water, so it needs sunlight. It also has to have chloroplasts, which are like mitochondria and regular cells with chlorophyll in it to do photosynthesis. But everybody leaves out the most important part. Nobody ever talks about the most important part. The chloroplasts require 20 nutrients to go through a series of chemical reactions to do photosynthesis. You can have all the sunlight you want, you can have all the chloroplasts you want, but if you don't have those 20 nutrients, you're not going to get photosynthesis. What's happening here is those streams and rivers of all these minerals coming from these two glaciers in that moraine into Lake Tahoe reached a critical mass, and all of the algae is producing a super amount of oxygen, and it's a super amount of oxygen driving these fires. And that's why they look different, and that's why they cannot be put out easily with the same old techniques with a shovel and cutting stuff and a bulldozer and stuff like that, because of all the oxygen driving this. And so what they need to do is dredge out all of the algae in that lake, just leave about 1 or 2%, just enough to put enough oxygen in the water for the fish, but dredge out all of this algae, dry it, and feed it to some deer and stuff like that. Don't waste it. But then it'll stop producing hyper amounts of oxygen, and the forest fires will be preventable and controllable. when you go back to
So excuse me, Doc. There's algae now that there wasn't before. It sounds like. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. There's so much algae in there now; it's choking the lake. Nobody wants to get in the lake anymore and swim because there's so much algae in there, and it's producing all this oxygen, which is driving the fire.
For one, these fires started way on the west side of the slope, way away from the lake. Same thing with the Dixie Fire. It started down in a very dry mountainous area. But there may be something to that. But Lake Tahoe has always been considered one of the clearest, cleanest lakes on Earth. Every time I've been up there.
And I haven't heard any change to
but we
that.
get algae.
I haven't been up there in a long time.
Yeah, we get algae blooms in the lakes in Oregon as well, where I live. They're short-lived. Sure, I'm sure they're producing a lot of algae, a lot of oxygen. Maybe there's something to that. The overgrowth of the forest and all the brush. Guess what? Every living tree out there in bush is going to be producing oxygen as well. But
that's correct.
Yeah.
But they have to have the minerals. See, the tree can grow with fewer minerals, but the algae requires 20 to do photosynthesis, and that's a very critical number. Okay, if it has 17, it ain't going to work. If it has 12, it's certainly not going to work. If it has low levels of all 20, it doesn't work very well. And so this is very critical. And the opposite happened in the 5 great extinctions, the mass extinctions millions of years ago, when thousands of species died every billion years. There was 5 mass extinctions. Thousands of species died because there was no oxygen. Okay, and that's because the moraines, just by dumb luck, dammed up all the streams and shut off the food supply to the algae, and the algae all died. And the algae then farmed coal. There was no coal until after these 5 mass extinctions. Coal is farmed by all the death of all these algae. 83% of all coal is from these algae that die from lack of these 20 nutrients.
Well, we'll never get. You couldn't touch Lake Tahoe to try to take anything out of it, let alone dredge out anything. You can't go down on the water and stick your feet in there that you don't have some bureaucrat saying that you're contaminating Lake Tahoe. Dredging out algae is never going to float with anybody unless the environmentalists do a 180-degree turn and say, "Oh my gosh, if we don't do this, we're going to lose the rest of our environment." I think there's a reckoning day coming with everybody who has been on board with all of these environmental restrictions and regulations. All of you that ascribe to that need to drive now from Chico in Oroville through the Sierra Nevada, up the Feather River Canyon, or up to Lake Almanor towards Susanville, and just look at what has happened because of all of these asinine policies that have been handed down by the courts and mismanaged by the Forest Service. Frankly, the Forest Service needs to be disbanded. At this point, they have absolutely mismanaged our national forests. They are all burning, and at least turn them back to the states. CAL FIRE and the state would do a much better job of managing the forests in California than the National Forest Service has done. It can be done in a sustainable, manageable, profitable process, and the lumber companies that own their own private timber around the state have done a much better job. And if you go up and look around Lake Almanor into the areas west of Lake Almanor, almost exclusively the only forests that survived this fire were the managed forests. Anything the Forest Service had is all toothpicks, it's all gray, totally burned out, desolate land now.
You said the magic word, mismanagement. That's the word that describes it all, mismanagement. And so I just appreciate everything you're saying. But if we don't dredge all those algae out of the Lake Tahoe, they'll never put out those fires until everything's burned.
I think we're going through a cycle in the natural flow of things in the environment. The temperatures go up. Those mass extinctions, if I recall, were associated with much warmer temperatures on Earth. And then it goes the other direction. I'm curious to see what's going to happen now with all of this smoke in the air. Has it warmed the Earth or cooled the Earth? I heard some stats last week. The amount of smoke and pollution and carbon that has been thrown up into the environment into the air because of this fire was equivalent to the output of 28 million automobiles.
Now you said the magic word, automobiles there. Have you ever heard of a kid dying in a car with the windows closed in the summertime?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, that's what's happening to our forests. What happens is when you don't have everything right in the metabolism of the forest, as you've been explaining very well, the carbon dioxide acts like a car window. And the heat from the sun's rays go through that and accumulates underneath this shell of this carbon dioxide, accumulates in there, and this is where you get global warming. It's not from fossil fuels. It's from the inability of the plants to properly metabolize carbon dioxide because they don't have enough nutrition. And when you look at all these things, when you look at all these global warmings and mass extinctions, they always occurred associated with mass glaciation.
Well, and I'm not the scientist on this part of it. I can't speak with any authority on what's going to happen, but there has been some talk that if the CO2 levels get high enough, maybe they will act as a shield and not as much solar energy will hit the earth, and maybe the place will cool off. So
no, it's going to get hotter.
So it remains to be seen what happens. But now we've got all this smoke in the air. Same thing happens with volcanic eruptions. When you put that much material, and I'm saying this because right now in the mountains, I just came down from there yesterday. I've spent a week there. I've been there 4 times over the last 5 weeks. The acorns are falling. The trees are starting to turn. And it is only the 1st of September. It's one of the earliest times I can recall that ever happened. That's usually a late September, October, fall thing, and we're not even into fall yet. We're still in spring. So I have to wonder, with all of the smoke that's been up there, do the trees, the squirrels are going nuts, the deer, all the animals up there are acting like it's getting ready to be fall and winter. And I have to wonder if all the smoke, if the trees think that they're farther into fall than they are because they haven't been getting all the sunlight they're used to. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. We're going to see how this all plays out. If this is not a really long, heavy winter, I'll be surprised because it looks like it's trying to start already.
Well, that would be good if, as part of the winter, the precipitation goes up.
Mm-hmm. and if you put that particulate matter into the air, all the smoke particles should act as cloud seeding, but we're just not seeing the moisture come in off the coast to take advantage of that and turn into rain. So it's well known that when you put particulates in the air, it forms a nidus for a water drop, and you get more moisture that falls.
Right.
So,
wow.
Right now, it is catastrophic up there. The extent and the dimensions of this fire are just unbelievable. And I drive from Central Oregon. It's been smoky from Central Oregon all the way through California. But the extent of this fire, you start seeing the effects now well north of Mount Lassen, and it stretches down to the same latitude as about Chico.
Yeah, and that's hyperoxygenation. And as the fire moves away, it calms down because the oxygen doesn't get that far. So this hyperoxygenation is right around the north end of Lake Tahoe because of the glaciers that are still there. The moraines are still there, and they're pumping those nutrients into the lake, causing the algae to pump out more oxygen.
Okay.
Well, it's an interesting theory. I don't know if I can speak to the validity of it or the likelihood, but it's interesting.
No, it's a fact. Well, it's a fact. I mean, I'm just quoting, from science that's there. I spent a couple of weeks working on this, and these are things that have been published, so that they just don't know why. I'm telling them why.
Yep, a lot of other lakes, I could see that. Lake Tahoe is rimmed by such vertical granite mountains that I have a hard time believing there were the huge glaciers pushing moraines into it. But there are a lot of other lakes, Pyramid, and a lot of other much flatter lakes out in flatter terrain where I could certainly see that happening. Montana, all the way up through Nevada, you certainly can see that. But my understanding of Lake Tahoe and these remote mountain lakes is most of them are big holes in the ground. Yes, they're formed from snowmelt, but how much of a glacial push and moraines and all of that, but
we're talking
certainly they're
100,000. We're talking 100,000 years ago, and Lake Tahoe is 13. It's like 1,300 feet deep in some places. It's a deep lake.
It was pushed up, when the Sierra Nevada got pushed up by the tectonic plates. Yes, it left a hole there for you. So.
Yep, and so, but this is the glaciers are still there, and they've been talking about all this these moraines pumping. Just ask Siri when we get off the air. Ask Siri how many glacial moraines are there pumping silt into northern Lake Tahoe. It'll blow your mind.
Wow. Okay, Doc. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on the thing and the facts or the theories or whatever. We're going to move on now. Appreciate your call. Your listening. You want to continue listening, or should we?
No, I've got a million other things.
I think. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay.
Good to talk to you, Doc.
Doctor, you too, Dr. Wattenberg. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye bye. So let's see. There goes Doc. Now, let's see. I am really concerned, as you mentioned, that we've been incredibly lucky this summer here in the Central Coast that we've enjoyed some unseasonably cool weather, at least along the coast. More so, I used to be very upset in in August when we didn't see the sun very much, and we were in the fog, and that would make me depressed. Now I'm happy.
Well, we just got a different weather pattern going on. Apparently, I haven't paid attention to that half of it, but it's been very, very dry inland, so there must not be a lot of moisture coming off the ocean and pushing farther inland, and maybe that's why you haven't had the fog and you've had great weather here. We're in a cycle somehow. That's obvious. We've got a drought that is very dramatic. Lake Oroville is at the lowest I think it's ever been. They had to shut the power plants off. They don't have enough water in Lake Oroville to run the hydroelectric plants at the bottom of the dam. And they are now releasing a bunch of water from Lake Almanor, which is right up in the middle of this Dixie Fire. It's one of the most beautiful high mountain lakes you've ever seen. It was very full.
It's low. Yeah,
it was very full until 3 weeks ago, but it's on purpose. They store water there and save it for later use in the summer down in the valley.
How do they store it if there isn't rain?
It accumulates over the winter and fills up, and they just don't let much out of it during the spring and early parts of the summer because they've got enough water in the lower reservoirs, so they hang on to that. And now they are releasing it in just gargantuan amounts to resupply Lake Oroville and the lower reservoirs so it can be used down lower. But the water out of the Feather River drainage, the North Fork of the Feather River, is what they call the Stairway of Power. And it is a series of, I think, 9 dams from 5,000-foot elevation down to Oroville, which is only a few hundred feet. And the water is used time and time again for hydroelectric power, but it's also storage for irrigation and farming use. But the lake has dropped dramatically in the last 2 weeks, and it's going to look like a drought, I'm sure, in another week or two once they drain it down to resupply everything downstream from it. So we're certainly in a drought. There is no question. Every measurement, by every authority states how little, precipitation we've had in the last few years. And it just compounds the problem in the forest. We've got a horribly mismanaged national forest, and your National Forest Service is going to burn up every precious green forest they can get their hands on until they are taken to task for this. And start out by putting out the fires very quickly, then allowing sustainable harvesting and logging and thinning. And once you get the forest thinned back out, then you can turn it back to Mother Nature and let her do her thing. Oregon's been much better at doing this, at least around the towns, to protect the towns. But Oregon has been way ahead of California in doing this management and then going back every 5 or 10 years and reintroducing fire into the forest. They've thinned it. They've taken the brush down. Yes, it looks ugly for a year or two until it heals and, all the evidence of man's activities go away. But then every 5 or 10 years, with the right weather and the correct winds, you can just start a fire on purpose and let it do this understory burn. And when it's all over with, it's a very beautiful thing. It was the cleanest forest you've ever seen. And there are spots within this Dixie Fire. If you really want to go see what happens, you need to drive through it. There are most of it has been horribly burned. It is scorched, toothpick trees, and nothing. And then there are areas that have been managed, and it is just beautiful.
Cosmic Joe has texted the following words to me. Climate has not been warming for 10,000 years, quote unquote. It's been already warm, relatively, for the 10,000 years since the last ice age. But now, instead of the natural cooling we could have expected, the heating is going into overdrive, thanks to billions still using dinosaur fossil fuels. That's what's different about our big fires, as predicted by climate scientists now. Are you nodding your head in agreement?
It's certainly warming. And with that and our mismanagement of our forests over the last 100 years, we have dramatically upset the natural balance of nature, weather, fire, and the forests. And the big mistake that was made back in the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 80s with the spotted owl, was the courts dictated that we just walk away from everything. No harvest, no remediation, very little forest management. And because we had stopped fires for the large part of the last 100 years, there was no way to put it back in balance without doing the mechanical human harvesting and trying to reverse it. The forests are massively large. There's no way we could ever put it all back into balance, but there is a significant percentage of it where we could have continued to harvest timber, use better practices. Hey, we learned a lot over the last 40 years about how to manage it. The equipment has improved dramatically. The ability to go out. Again, you need to drive up through this fire. You can drive through most of the highways now. You can't go off of the highways into the private areas that the National Guard's out there preventing people from looting. But you can drive through Highway 89 and Highway 70 now. And if you want to see how quickly forces can be mobilized to deal with all the burned and dangerous timber along the sides of the roads, you're going to be appalled, really, at how many trees have already been taken down along the highways in the name of safety. But it is absolutely impressive how quickly humans can go out and do this work in the forest. The mechanization now, the feller bunchers and the Timcos and things that are used now, this is not one guy walking around with a chainsaw. So there can be some pretty dramatic management to the forest done in a much cleaner manner than was done 30 and 40 years ago, and that needs to be done. This needs to be a new Public Works, CCC, Great Depression era work project. In my mind, this goes way beyond any other infrastructure project that could be implemented, at least on the western half of the United States. Why it's not being talked about, I don't know. And then Hurricane Ida comes through and all the attention of the nation is down there. But yes, they've got millions of people out of power, thousands of homes burned. From a human tragedy standpoint, that's much more significant than what happened to my little town of Greenville, 2,000 people. Actually, probably about 1,200 by the time it burned through this. It used to be a very thriving area, but that's the boom and the bust of the West. It's just what we're used to.
Right.
But from managing something on a national infrastructure standpoint, they're ignoring the national forest. And
right.
that it runs from the Rockies all the way to the Pacific Ocean.
We've got some callers now. Don't know quite who they are. Who's this? Hello, you're on the air, whoever you are.
It's Downtown Al.
Hi, DTA. You're on with Dr. Eric and me. Yeah.
Okay. Hey, I wanted to add one other thing. We used to use a lot of the national forests as rangeland, and that is one thing that helps keep a lot of the underbrush down.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you can see it here in Santa Cruz. If you go hiking, there's massive growth of poison oak in the understory in a lot of places. And if you look at like the management techniques that the the native Ohlone used here, they would burn stuff oftentimes in the spring before they headed up into the higher, cooler areas. And I notice up here in our own green belt, Pogonip, all these old meadows that used to be open, you're starting to see invasive Douglas fir coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all little ones. And, that land had been maintained by the Indians before, and then also later on by the ranchers, because when you run cattle, they're going to trample, and, if they don't eat it, they trample it in a lot of cases. And it's kept those meadows open for probably thousands of years. I had a professor up at UCSC who'd mapped out a lot of that stuff. When the Spaniards came, they were trying to stop the Indians from burning everything, but at least they were running cattle still, and it kept a lot of those areas open. And I think that's an important part of that, running goats, sheep, and cattle, not letting them overgraze, maybe not letting them, cause erosion and pollute water runoff. But I think that's an important part of it. And they've been excluded from a lot of national forest land as well as state land.
Well, we used to have much bigger herds of deer and elk as well, which serve the same purpose. Elk are basically cattle with antlers and a bigger animal. They're grass eaters. They run in big herds. Interestingly, and this was nothing I intended to do, but we, up in Central Oregon, started working with a farmer, a rancher, a single guy operation. Look up Sisters Cattle Company, sisters like brothers and sisters, cattle company. And he's doing this high intensity, short duration grazing. And we let him out on our 15-acre pasture that we have around our place in Oregon. And the theory behind it is, and whether it's going to prove to be right, is that you put the animals out in a very small area. He uses electric fence, moves his herd once a day. They come in, they take 2 and 3 foot tall grass. They eat that little, 100 by 100 acre spot or 100 by 100 foot spot down in one day. And then he moves them to the next spot. So they're on, they eat it, they poop and they pee all over it. Their hooves chew up the ground, kind of, till the ground a little bit, and then you get off. And a month later, the grass that comes up in there looks like a golf course. So there are management techniques that work, but yes, it involves grazing. And again, the environmentalists are just against letting a cow out onto anything. And you get exactly what you're saying. The trees start creeping in, taking over the meadows. The brush grows up, and pretty soon you have no meadow. And then the worst thing is when a fire comes through, it scorches and sterilizes everything. These fires get so hot now, nothing will grow for years in there. A cool fire just burns off the duff on top, and all the new stuff comes right back the next year, and it looks beautiful. But when you get these really hot fires, they literally sterilize the soil. There's no seed left in it to come back. So then you get the runoff. Now we're going to plug up the creeks and the streams and the rivers with all of this silt. It's going to acidify the water because the ash is acidic. We've got all these problems to deal with now. It's going to be just a whole cascade of unfavorable things that happen now. The runoff, the slides, the stuff coming down the canyon walls and plugging up the rivers. It's going to be ugly.
Does that make sense to you downtown, Al?
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is, I love Doc Wallach, and a sign of somebody who's always thinking, do come up with some little bit wacky ideas at times, and I don't think this is an oxygen-driven fire. It may be contributing a little bit in certain areas, but this is a structural fire, and it's because of years and years, decades, 100 years of mismanagement of the forest in a lot of ways, and most of it in the most recent decades. And I've seen it everywhere. When I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona, and places in New Mexico, normally you'd come in the ponderosa pine forest. They would log an area, and then you'd either reseed or you would let it all come up from these mother trees, and you get a lot of this understory growth called blackjack, and they're all these tight little seedlings struggling for light and water and, nutrients. And half of them die out, and a lot of their side branches are dead. And if you don't get in there and clear them out, and, it isn't all just the environmentalists, too. It's the National Forest Service.
Which is absolutely populated and controlled by the environmentalists now, unfortunately.
Well, it might be, because some of the stuff I saw was when the lumber mill closed in Flagstaff. They stopped doing a lot of things, so it might have been financially driven too at the time. I don't know for sure.
Well, they were all run out in the 1980s because of the spotted owl. They just couldn't do business anymore. And the big error was they just walked away from it.
But what they would do is they would go in there and they'd slash out a bunch of that blackjack in the bigger trees, and then they would heap it up and they would burn it in the fall. And they would also allow people to go out. You didn't even need a permit, I don't think. And cut out some of the scrubby oak for firewood. We'd go out in the fall and cut firewood. And some of that is trying to replicate the original old-growth forest that looked like a parkland where you had these big, big trees, and then you only had a few smaller trees coming up in between. But the understory was very, very clear, and there was lots of room for game, like you're talking about, elk and deer and, whatever else was there. And, I've seen fires in areas, in places that had never been logged or touched in any way. And you can jump over the burning line of fire. That, the front line, it just kind of burns along like you were talking about, and it burns up the duff and the down branches and the dead undergrowth. And once in a while it'll snag and flare up. But it's never very, very hot. And you can jump back and forth over it if you just let it burn.
You can walk on it. Yeah.
And that's what you used to get in the past.
We want to get to one more caller before the top of the hour. Keep all the others. If you're on hold, we'll get to you right after the break here.
If I could say one last thing.
Hurry up, please.
This is structural, and people need to stop talking about global warming because, whether it's happening or not, this is an immediate thing due to mismanagement, whether it was cold or hot or whatever the climate's doing. This is just mismanagement by government. And we need to address that directly. And I'm really upset with people like Newsom talking about global warming when it's mismanagement of politicians like himself that are causing most of these problems.
Got it. Thanks, Al. Hey, Lee and Spreckles, you're on the air on KSCO.
I need for you to let me come into the second hour because I go back to 1960. And I have some statements that are critical to this. It involves the moisture content that's coming off our Pacific Ocean that's being interrupted, and I would like to address that in a serious way because Sequoia National Forest doesn't have an aquifer like Lake Tahoe does. Yet Lake Tahoe has its own breed of events here. The air mass is different. The Doc's onto something. He knows what he's talking about. But the big thing is that moisture content, if it's not there, you have drought. You have every material that is incendiary. If it's dry, it burns better. If the air mass is different in its structure, you get higher fires. I mean, so let's get into this thing.
Okay, we'll come back to you at the top of next hour, but it won't be for long, Leah, because we got a whole line of other people.
Well,
I want to get to everybody, but here, that's fine. You need more than a minute and a half here. So, okay, thank you very much. That's the end of the first hour here on the Saturday special with Dr. Eric Wattenburg on KSCO Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey, San Jose. It is coming.
Gilroy southbound 101 near Searle Road is stop and go. That's going to wrap it up for traffic and weather. If you see something that we forgot to mention, give us a call at 475-1080. Coming up next on your favorite radio station, it is hour 2 of the Saturday special with your host, MZ.
You are absolutely correct. Now, let's make it official, okay? Hour number 2 music. Here, 3, 2, 1.
To hang up on you, but I'm sorry, baby, but I have to go. It's time for that
Okay, we've been having a fairly spirited discussion about fires and how they're different these days and what needs to be done, so stay with us.
I'm sorry, baby, but I really gotta go to KSCO Radio. Bye.
Hey, the news came and cut us off right in the middle of Lee and Spreckle. So go ahead, Lee. Finish up, please, what you were saying.
Art Bell, before George Norrie took over in 2002, February the 27th, interviewed a fellow that went up and pulled air mass samples off of chemtrails. Art was shocked. These three different points that he brought to the table. First, he found coal scrubbings in one line. Second line, he found aluminum. And then Art kept asking him, well, what did you find on that last one that's so big? Fine ground crystal. I've got a book by Peter Kirby from Amazon in the last 3-4 months ago, and it's called Chemtrails Exposed, the New Manhattan Project. Now, there's patents on geoengineering that have been given to these people. I experienced right here on the corridor of the Monterey Bay here in Salinas, Spreckles area. I see the weather. I've been working with the weather since 1962. My friends had Carmel Valley Lumber. I've been in the tree business. I've been in the environmental business for 30 years. I can read weather, and this weather that we are experiencing is being altered, and it's being seriously altered, but not just here. Last year, at Sequoia National Forest, some of the oldest trees in the world, the whole stand is gone. Up in Paradise, the fires are raged. I'm telling you, the floods that are going on back east, all of this stuff is jacked up by geoengineering, and that's where the trigger is that sets everything off. Now, Doc's right on Lake Tahoe. If you take the elements that are present in a certain area, you can get different results. That higher burning envelope is because the dry air, the moisture content, the vegetation, the cellulose is dry. It's in a kindling form, Mike, and Dr. Bill's son. I can tell you for certain that this geoengineering is the root cause of what's causing all this nightmare. And I mean, you can go over to Fukushima. If you stretch the magnetic field in a certain way by messing with the magnetic energy of the air mass and moisture content, I guarantee you this kind of stuff can be done. And you've got to look at the patents. You've got to look at who's involved in this, because there's 700 planes that Boeing built. You've got to look at Dane Weddington. You've got to get into looking at geoengineering and who's doing it. The air traffic controllers know who's up there. The satellite, if it hasn't been hidden and covered up, will reveal these planes were present days before and months before, and what's going on here. Fellas, we have to wake up. We cannot trust what is going on above our heads, because I can tell you, when we've logged in the National Forest here, you come back a year later and you never know we were there, because we instead of just dropping the tree, we topped it. We cut it down, and the spar fell. We put it where it's not going to tear everything up. But I can tell you that up in Colorado, they had fires up there, and they learned something from new fire science, and that is that if you get an amber, heat it up, and then you get an air mass, you can move that amber for miles. Yeah, but the air mass that goes all the way, we get into the jet stream. We get into it's all controlled back here or anywhere that they start messing with the entire way God's structured and built this.
Okay,
weather.
Lee, thank you. I got to move on to a bunch of other callers, but appreciate your call to the Saturday special. Here's Rory. Hi, Rory, you're on.
Gentlemen, hi, thank you. Yeah, hey, just briefly to Lee's point, everybody can go to YouTube, and all you got to do is type in CIA Director John Brennan discusses stratospheric aerosol injection. That was in 2016. He was Obama's CIA director in Obama's last year. So go look at it, watch it, do some research. It's pretty scary. They're using stratospheric aerosol injection to stop global warming, and there's your chemtrails. So go look at it. It's still up. Thank you, Eric, for being on. As kids, I grew up in Southern Cal, but my dad was originally from San Francisco and then Marysville, Nevada City, and my grandfather was in the lumber business. So we toured Greenville and all those small lumber towns, not just there, but up the North Coast too. And I feel so bad for you guys and the natives of Greenville in that area. I was shocked by the photos. It does look like a bomb went off in that town. I recommend everybody go look and for yourselves. And Eric, when you drive up, I know you're up in Bend, right?
Yeah, I live outside of Bend now, yes.
Yeah, all along there, Highway 97, you've got mismanaged forest. It looks like a thicket. The trees are just spindly, and they're like, 12 inches apart?
Yeah, or less. Yeah, they're little toothpicks. Yeah, lodgepole, and they're just packed in like a lawn. So.
Yeah, it's not right. And I saw a couple years ago, we were we're in Estes Park. All the private property outside of Estes before you go into the Rocky Mountain National Park are, like you said, they're well-spaced, large trees, new trees coming, grass. You get into the national park, and it looks like those lodgepole off of Highway 97 south of Bend, mostly south is where I saw it. And it's going to take a fire to burn that.
Yeah,
it all goes back, like you said.
They're trying to go in and treat a lot of that. Yeah, they're starting to go in and treat a lot of that, but it's a gargantuan problem. That terrain looks exactly like, if you've ever gone to Yellowstone, as you drive out of Idaho from the south up into Montana, and it's the same flat plateau with these really tightly packed lodgepole. And then what does our National Park Service do when that fire started in Yellowstone? I'm going to say 20 years ago. How long ago was
15,
that?
20 years ago.
And they just let it burn. They burned off over 1 million acres of Yellowstone. And now what do you have? Now you have just a carpet of brush. When you burn that, like they did, and like has happened up here on the Dixie Fire and now the Caldor Fire, now it's going to be 200 years before you ever get anything approaching the forest that we had before it burned, because the next thing that comes through is nothing but brush. Go look at any fire that the Forest Service has mismanaged and just walked away from after the fire burned. They walk away. They don't let you harvest the trees. They don't go back and replant. And all you get is 10-foot tall manzanita and snow brush. Well, another fire is going to come through there in another 10 or 20 years. It's going to burn all that off. Nothing's going to survive.
Of course, they grow. Well, manzanita grows back from the root.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get rid of it.
Yeah, so there's going to have to be 5 or 6 cycles of this over the next 200 years to ever, and hopefully some trees are going to survive all of these fires and become the old growth forest in that area.
Yeah, they need to do an intensive reforestation program in those areas. Why are they not doing that?
Well, if you're not careful, they overplant that too. I can show you many replanting reseeded areas after forest fires, and again, the Forest Service does that. They walk away, they leave it. Well, then you've got these toothpick forests that they planted 10 times as many trees in there as they should have. But then you plant these new trees, they're little seedlings. They grow up over 10 years. They're maybe 4 or 5 feet high. Well, the brush is 10 feet high. The fire comes through, burns all of it off again, and you're back to the word go. So this is going to take a...
Yeah, it's going to take intensive management, and we've got to get the deep ecologists out of these services because they're what's the word? Resolute. I'm not coming up with the right adjective, but they're like you can't reason with them. It's their way or the highway, and they have the control of those agencies.
Yeah.
One thing I'll note.
How are you going to do that, Rory? How are you going to do that?
Well, we got a recall going for a numbnuts governor that has no business being
numbnuts
governor. So let's see what happens. Yeah, let's see what happens. Real quick.
Now, I will give you this. The states seem to manage their forests much better than the federal government. So if you look at some state-managed areas, which are typically around communities, because that's where CAL FIRE's jurisdiction exists, the states and the private timber companies know how to do this. They've been doing it because that is their livelihood, particularly the private lumber companies. They know how to do this. You just can't get the Forest Service to get on board with it. We need to get rid of the Forest Service. Forget the national forests anymore. Let's put them all back to state forests and see if we can develop a different structure that is much more responsive and responsible than the Forest Service has been.
Right. Okay. Well, listen, Rory, thank you very much for calling 479-1080. Next caller, Randall in Pacific Grove. Randall, you're on with Dr. Eric and MZ.
Hello. I remember Bill Wattenburg. I used to listen to him a lot. Anyway, I'm calling because the relation of the fires out here, we've been living in a combustion oven for a few months, and I think it's changed. It's dried and pushed out all the moisture and created a thermal cap and bubble. It's probably the reason why there's been excessive rain after the last hurricane and all these floodings in New York City and New Jersey. And I believe that since they said that the rain is not tropical, it's very, very cold. And I think that all these months of creating this gigantic thermal pressure condition in the West has caused all of the rain to condense and fall down over on the East Coast, and also the fact that it's cold rain, it's not tropical rain. And they keep saying it's the tail end of Ida, but it sounds like it's a combination of factors, which they touched on. But my theory is all these fires are creating an enormous atmospheric desert that prevents any moisture from condensing in this area, and it's all falling down on the East Coast.
Well,
I'll also add.
Yeah, I agree with much of what you're saying, but I think the real issue is, we get a wind out of the west, off of the ocean, blowing west to east over California, so it's picking up all that smoke, and yes, it is spreading it all the way across the globe, I think, at this point. And when you put that much smoke and that particulate matter up in the atmosphere, that is the essence of cloud seeding. And so you may well see more moisture in the Midwest and the Plain States and throughout the East Coast because of all this fine particulate matter. The heavy stuff, the really thick, nasty smoke particles are heavy enough they generally fall out as ash, but the lighter, smaller particles which stay aloft up in the higher elevations can be carried around the world. I don't know if that's contributing to what we're seeing here in California, because most of that smoke's drifting from the Sierra Nevadas eastward. Although I've been amazed. I don't know. I drove down here yesterday from Plumas County in the northeast California down through the valley and down through the Bay Area. Where's the smoke down here coming from? Do we have fires, west of us?
I believe that there's a gigantic thermal bubble that's preventing any moisture from being in California and the western United States. I believe that the pressure of the heat, because it is literally a combustion oven for months.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people have a concept of how enormous this is. It has literally created an atmospheric desert where no H2O molecules can combine. And so there's no global weather system now that is going to allow the rain to be distributed as it used to be. That's why it's all being dumped in the Northeast. I was emphasizing the big, giant thermal bubble that is created from this inferno.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the arson. The arson is also another problem, too.
That's been
There's a lot of
that's
arson.
been well known for decades. People either love fire and they go out and start the fire just for the fun of it, or somebody thinks they've got a bunch of equipment that's been sitting idle and not making any money. Hey, if I go start a forest fire, guess what? The Forest Service marches in. They'll hire me, my water truck or my dozer. There have been plenty of cases of that, and it's very unfortunate. But this thing, the one fire of concern, I don't know how the Calvador fire started. I haven't been following that one as closely. I've been wrapped up with the Dixie fire.
They said arson.
Okay.
They said arson.
Yeah, the Dixie
They're
fire.
not prosecuting anybody.
And, the Dixie fire, at least initially, one of the troublemen for PG&E made a statement that a tree had fallen over a high-voltage power line. We'll see if PG&E is going to continue to accept that or if they're going to back out and fight this. We'll see. But it's unfortunate any way it goes. But, yeah, once the fire gets started, it's just Katie bar the door. So,
Yeah.
They want to waste the water on the Northeast. Yeah, really.
Well, okay. Thank you very much for calling the Saturday special.
Thank you.
Randall.
Thank you.
In Pacific Grove. Before we go to Gene in Monterey and Shelley in Monterey and Sean in Live Oak, I want to read this email that came in last hour from Kurt in, I think Kurt's in Monterey also. Dr. Hartzveld, a cathedral forest is a healthy forest. Dr. Hartzveld taught conservation at San Jose State. He did his doctorate on preventive burns in the Sierras in the 60s. Are you familiar with that name, Dr. Hartzveld?
no, I'm not.
Okay. He stressed with us that the understory had to be cleared and then have regular maintenance fires to keep the forest healthy. As Dr. Wattenberg is saying, grazing and cool fires. In an overgrown situation, you might need a crew of Duffies to get some of it out so that goats and cattle can then make the forest healthy again. Thank you. We desperately need this info out. And that's from Kurt. So next caller here coming up will be, I'm going to take next. That's Gene in Monterey. Hey, Gene, you're on the air.
Caller got my name wrong, but I'm calling about the Rothschilds, PG&E, Gavin Newsom, and the Forest Service.
Oh.
The Rothschilds for many years owned PG&E or had a big stake in it, and they still may. So we have one of the biggest, most powerful families in the world from overseas that owns PG&E. Now, PG&E owns Gavin Newsom. Right after all this trouble they gave us, what does Gavin do? He gives them all kinds of new contracts. Now, they're going to raise the price of your electricity again because they're going to have to pay out this fire. It's time for Californians to get rid of PG&E and not pay those increases, get a new company to take over, to get a governor in place that will do forest husbandry so this doesn't happen in the future. Gavin's had almost 3 years to get his act together, and he's left the forest untouched, ready to go kindling anytime it wants to. And we've got the media everywhere trying to promote his staying in office. In fact, I don't even trust Larry Elder as being anyone but a shill for Gavin Newsom. He's going to lose on purpose. We're in a pickle here. We've got this world order guy, Gavin Newsom, and the Rothschilds and PG&E running a roughshod over you, and we've got to get rid of a lot of them if we're going to have any California left.
You know, I agree with you, Steve in Monterey. Appreciate your call to 479-1080. Our next caller is Shelley, also in Monterey. Shelley, you're on the air.
Hi, MD.
Hi.
Eric, I was wondering what your prognosis for, given everything that's going on in this country, what your prognosis would be for the state of our country in the future. And I don't know, I think that's a big question, but I'd like to hear the answer.
You know, I've dabbled in politics. I've got my own opinions. It's very clear that the Forest Service no longer is a service to us. They are a mouthpiece of the environmentalists, and their only real role anymore is to tell you what you can't do in the forest. They don't manage it. They don't make it pay for itself. They don't treat it as their own. The courts have mandated largely what the Forest Service will do, largely in the name of the spotted owl. The spotted owl was their mechanism to insert this influence over what we do and don't do with the forests. It's going to take us 100 years to fix this problem. It took us 100 years to get here, and in healthcare, I tell everybody it takes you twice as long to fix a problem than it did for that problem to crop up. If you don't take care of yourself and you gain weight and you get out of shape, get ready. It'll probably take you twice as long to get back to where you need to be. So if this takes us 200 years to put the forest back into balance, so be it. But we've got to come at this from a whole different angle. And at this point, I don't think the Forest Service is doing anything for us except making it worse. The old nickname was the Forest Circus, and it really is now. They just run around in their trucks. They point at things. They do very little. They produce nothing. And largely at their hands is the reason we are where we are now. The loggers did not like logging the way they were told to do it by the Forest Service. They cringed when the logging sales were laid out. Where were the roads going to go? Which timber was going to be taken? Where was it going to be on what slope? I can show you dozens of examples where the timber sales were on the other side of a draw, and the Forest Service would sit on the road on the other side of the draw or the canyon and look across with their binoculars and watch the logging sale going on. They didn't want to get out of their damn truck and get on their feet and walk around. So a lot of these clear-cut areas, which everybody screamed, the loggers didn't like it either. You don't clear-cut the Sierra Nevada like you do the Cascade Mountains. They're a completely different ecosystem. But they tried it. And if you look at where these clear cuts were, they're all on the other side of a ravine where there was a nice road where the Forest Service guys could sit in their pickup truck and just watch it from a distance. They're that lazy. So these are all just little examples of the asinine policies and procedures they've got in place and the type of people that populate the Forest Service. So I think the biggest thing we could do is get rid of the Forest Service. Maybe not the whole USDA. Maybe they do well for agriculture and the farmers, but they have absolutely mismanaged our forests, and it's time to get them out. So
wow, and replace them with?
I think to start with, let the states manage their own forests.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you, Shelley in Monterey. Here's Sean in Live Oak. You're on the air, Sean.
Oh, hi there. And I'm going to bring in sort of a different angle because I think I don't want to repeat things that have already been said, but I was talking to a CAL FIRE person, and I saw this special about Canadian Air firefighting planes, and I asked her how many of these does CAL FIRE have, and she wasn't aware of any. And this is we got to catch up on our force management practices, but that's going to take time, and we have to up our firefighting capability. And when I saw the documentary on this, Canada Air is a Canadian company, and they've got 60 of those planes in Canada, and the United States has got 4. And I think we need a lot more than just 4 of those planes.
I think you're exactly right. It's unfortunate we have to drop the retardant and everything on the forest, but there's no other way to put these fires out in these rugged, inaccessible areas. You can't put enough people on the ground with shovels and rakes and Pulaskis and chainsaws in a lot of this terrain. There's no way to stop it. And the Forest Service needs to have a policy that they just put these things out immediately at whatever cost, because you can see what happens now. If you let these burn because you think it's healthy for the environment and it's not harming anybody and it's burning through some rugged, inaccessible terrain. So we've just got to let it burn until we can find a convenient place miles ahead of that fire to set up and make our stand, put in fire line. The fire gets to be so hot, so big, that you can't put enough fire line in. You'd have to completely bare a mile or two of forest in the hope that some embers didn't come down and jump your line and start spot fires. So only if all of the conditions line up just perfect, you've got very calm winds, humidity, cool temperatures, do you stand a chance of getting right on the front of the fire, putting a line in. It's called a hot line. Been there many times. The dozer's right on the edge of the fire. And you put the line in so it burns right up to that line and then stops burning on the ground. But if it gets up into the trees with the wind and the heat and the climate that the fire creates itself, you can't stop it. It lifts it up and it throws it miles ahead of you, and there's just no way to stop it. So.
Well, the other thing I think you're not understanding what this plane is. It's a flying boat, and it doesn't dump retardant on the fire. It dumps water.
Yeah, the problem is in our terrain, we don't have open lakes and things in most places where you can actually land that plane or skim the water to lift up the water. The Sierra Nevada is too vertical. There are very few lakes that are big enough. And Canada,
one of our big problem fires
Canada's a little bit different. It's a lot flatter terrain up there. They've got a lot of mountain lakes they can swoop in and grab that water. But there are ways to do it. I can also in the Dixie Fire. Part of the reason our 160 acres survived is because 2 days before the town of Greenville burned, the fire came over the ridge. It burned right down towards our property. As I said in the first hour, sat down and did a nice ground burn. But the Forest Service and CAL FIRE got very scared about the town of Greenville. And they bombed the hell out of a strip of land between our property and town. They were going to let our property burn, and that's okay. I get it. It was one property and a few houses and buildings compared to a whole town. But they bombed the crap out of this area, about a 300-foot wide strip, and laid down fire retardant like I've never seen laid down. And then the day later, the guy said, well, that didn't do any good. We just spent $5 million, and it really didn't help us at all. The guy's a complete idiot, because 2 days later, I can show you what did not burn because of that fire retardant line they laid down. And that fire retardant line, the only thing left green next to the town of Greenville is because of that fire retardant line they laid down 2 days earlier. It didn't help the night that they put it down, but 2 days later, it did a wonderful job, and it's a big part of the reason our property is still green, because it just, by coincidence, happened to get laid down 2 days earlier and helped prevent the fire from burning from the town back up into our property. So, yes, the fire retardant planes are very effective. They don't use them soon enough. They don't hit it heavy enough, and we don't have enough resources.
Thank you, Sean in Live Oak. Here's Gary in Pacific Grove. You're on, Gary.
Hi. Pardon me. The comment I'd like to make is I really think that in California, if the forests need to be maintained better. It's not a complete solution, but let's say you have an infestation of pine bark beetle, and there's several thousand trees standing dead. I think that they should encourage loggers to get in there and harvest those trees before they start to deteriorate. And it's my understanding over in Europe that the forests there are much better managed, and of course they have a much smaller land mass to work with, but probably some of the principles that they use could be applicable to here in California. And but any rate, that's kind of the gist of it. That I think that whenever there are standing dead trees in a significant number, that it's time to let the loggers in there and do their work.
And you will see, you mark my word, 5 years from now, you will go through this forest that's burned, the Dixie Fire, the Caldora Fire. The private timber companies, the private landowners will have gone through and harvested the trees that burned because there's still some wood value to them, and they want to get the dead timber out of there and replant the area. The Forest Service land will still be in this condition. All the dead trees will be on it. And we've got a spot up where I live now in Central Oregon that the dead trees are still there 25 years later. Now it's a hazard to even walk through the forest because you don't know which one of those snags is going to fall over on you and hurt you. And the brush is about 12 feet tall in there. It is a very stark difference and contrast between the way private lands are managed and the way the Forest Service manages it. The Forest Service doesn't care. They've got a job. They get their paychecks. They go out. They set up a few timber sales. They do a little clearing here. They do a little back burning there in the spring. But they just don't care. Nobody's job is on the line. It's not their resource. They've got their cushy job. And their performance, at least up to this point, their paycheck's not dependent on their performance and how well they did their job. So unless there is a tectonic shift in the way the Forest Service manages land. 5 and 10 years from now, it's going to make you cry to go out there and see what they did not do with everything that burned compared to the private landowners. And it's all over the Dixie Fire. Just go drive up around Lake Almanor. You can see the difference. It's right there off the road. You don't even have to get out of your car.
Gary, thanks for the call, the 479-1080. All right, I read an email a little bit ago which suggested that Duffy and his crew get up there. Now, Duffy, who's Duffy? You were wondering who Duffy was, right, Eric?
Wasn't that the caller?
No. This was Duffy was referred to in an email that I read right before the caller. That's Duffy.
Oh, hello,
Duffy meet Dr. Eric. Yeah, and so you happened to be here when I read that email about you.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and
but it just goes to show you, the timing was perfect.
Okay.
It was like how you always talk about a segue.
Yeah.
That was a perfect segue to listen to Jim Duffy.
Okay, what is Jim Duffy going to say
So
now?
here's what I want to say, all right? One, just like he talked about, the private sector is what I want to focus on. Everybody's focusing on, the national level. What I want to focus on is the private sector, the individual homes, and how to protect those homes when, you're surrounded by these forests. How do you protect your home, all right? I've been doing fire clearing for 45 plus years, all right? So I pretty much know my stuff. I specialize in poison oak, all right? Now, one of the things that I try to do every season, because at the end of around October, poison oak loses its leaves. So what I try to do is get in there and get as much of it removed throughout various properties. That's the less poison oak that the first responders are going to be inhaling during one of these smoke and one of these heavy fire situations, all right? So the more I can get out of the land, the less those guys are going to be breathing it, all right? So that's one of my primary goals. Here's one of my problems that I wanted to discuss today, and thank you for allowing me on to discuss this problem that I face, all right? Number one problem. Nobody's really looking at, you got all this clearing. You keep talking about chainsaws and cutting this stuff down there. What the heck do you do with the brush after it's been cut? Nobody's talking about that, all right? There's only 3 ways to get rid of it, okay? You either burn it, which isn't suggested because there's only certain times of the year you can do that, or haul it, or you chip it. Okay, those are the only 3 ways you get it off your property once you cut it, all right? Now, here's a good example of what I should have been here earlier, all right? I was trying to get here earlier, all right? I was working on Walnut Avenue, okay, from a tree that has a disease, and instead of being able to cut it down, we're being held up because we need a permit, okay? That's one. All right, here's number 2. I spent most of my time this morning, all right, not with my hands on chainsaws and weed eaters, but on a steering wheel driving this material to the dumps, all right, having to haul it, all right? I'm frustrated that, one, we're not getting any cooperation from our local dumps and things like that. They close at 3:30, and if you don't get in there by, 3:29, you got to haul the brush back and let it sit on your truck all day Sunday and then take it in the morning on Monday.
Why isn't it open on Sunday? Why isn't
Who knows? A cost is what I understand. But let me get back to, what I want to do, what I tried to do, all right? I called all these tech companies back in 2020. I was seeing the same dry vegetation in early March. And so I said, wow, this is going to be a bad fire season. I need to contact some people. And at that time, they were they issued that stay-at-home stuff, and all those people were, worked from home stations. I was trying to save most of those properties, so I was calling all these tech companies and trying to say, hey, look, you guys got more money over here in the Silicon Valley than most places, most countries on the planet. What I'm asking for is some kind of funding to give these stay-at-home properties 100 feet of defensible space. I couldn't make any common sense to these people of what I was attempting to do early in the season. That was like early in March. By the time August rolled around, we had that lightning storm roll in here. It was way too late, and none, I could have probably, if I had been able to make sense to have some of these people, the right people, and got funding for, I needed a reliable truck and a wood chipper. I probably could have saved 15, maybe 20 homes from burning to the ground. That was what I was trying to do, okay? I kept hearing things like, well, the computer model looks like it. I go, look, you're looking at aerial photos from 2010 when we weren't in a drought. I'm telling you, I'm boots on the ground, and I'm telling you the vegetation right now here in early March is already drying out. We're going to have a bad fire season. Well, we're leaning forward to getting, a more green approach. We want to get goats. What do you mean goats? I was just going, hey, you know what? Goats are great after the clearing's been done. Their jaw strength will only eat down maybe, a half-inch diameter of a plant. And after that, it's still left there. But we don't even have time for goats, okay? It takes, 6 months or more to eat off the volume of fuel that's in these Santa Cruz Mountains currently, all right? We don't have time to send a herd of goats out. That's number one. Number two, how do you transport them? I go, how do these people, how do you get this livestock to these locations on a magic carpet? Come on. You got to have the adequate, safe transport thing. I've never even seen one of these goat transports, okay? And so, I'm talking to these people, and nothing I'm saying. And then, well, we only have funding for startups, right? Startups? What do you mean startup? I said, the thing you need to start up is a wood chipper and start reducing fuel. Give me a break with these responses. So anyway, what I'm on the air today to do, all right? I'm not asking for money from the private sector. What I'm asking for is the right people so I could talk to the right people, because I'm looking at $3.5 trillion in infrastructure money that just got signed, all right? Which would mean saving homes would come under infrastructure, okay? And so my thing is the money's out there in this infrastructure bill. What I need is to be put in contact with the right people to allow me to get a grant so I could then get a reliable truck and get a very, very efficient chipper and begin to reduce the fuel in these Santa Cruz Mountains. All right?
And so you do that. And there is a program out there. California has it. Yeah, my mic's on. Maybe I turned my headphones down. The program's out there because we are signed up to do that. In fact, we had that timber sale, thinning project, chipping, clearing, fire reduction plan all in place to be done this spring. And you know what held it up on our property? Unfortunately, we'd done enough forest maintenance over the last 50 years. We got away with it and we didn't burn in this fire. But what held it up was the mills wouldn't take the timber because they had so much timber left over from last year's fires, they couldn't take any new timber this year. And a component of that project is they cut and chip a lot of the small stuff you can't make lumber out of, but they've got to load that in a truck and drive it 60 miles to a cogen plant, which probably was in on this grant proposal and got themselves in a sweetheart deal to be the recipients of all this chipped biomass that's being paid for by the state grants, and then they get to use it for fuel and make power and make money off of it. So you've got a whole sequence and a whole structure of special interests, buddy backroom deals going on here. And the state does have, but it's not a very big program, but they do have that out there. If you get the grant, then I guess you go buy your truck so you can complete the grant. But the error in all of that is the way it was all set up to be done in the first place, which is you can't burn anything these days because it creates greenhouse gas, right? So what do you do with all this biomass? Every town should have a huge biomass plant in it because we're growing so much biomass that they ought to be able to keep themselves going. The mills do it. The mills burn all their sawdust. They have a cogen plant. They sell that power back to the power company. But the environmental regulations that these cogen plants have to go through just to burn plain old wood fuel will just make your head spin. And so those have not been installed. And then the environmentalists say, well, that's greenhouse gas, so we don't want you burning anything. I don't know. Where do the environmentalists think we're going to get our power from? Solar power and wind? That's great. That's 5 or 10% of your needs. Well, what do you do with the other 90%? You're going to burn something. You can't do nuclear anymore because, by gosh, that's terrible. We took out Rancho Seco and we took out Diablo Canyon. Does California even have a nuclear plant left anymore? I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, but it has appalled me for the last 40 years that nobody has developed and implemented a bunch of biomass plants in every community that are clean. They got scrubbers. You know, you see stuff coming out the smokestack, but that's all steam. There's very little pollution out of that. Okay, so all of you do-gooders out there wouldn't let us do this for the last 40 years. Now what do you get? You get an uncontrolled, massive wildfire that throws up everything into the environment that you never wanted up there. Houses, hydrocarbon products, propane tanks, tires. The houses by themselves are full of carcinogens when you burn them. So now we've got the starting phases of the cleanup in Greenbelt now. The first people coming in are hazmat teams to go through and get rid of all the batteries and all the tires and all the oil out of all the burned vehicles.
Just look at how much
the people that threw the limits on us 40 years ago with the spotted, all in the name of the spotted owl, basically, have absolutely shot themselves in the face, not the foot. They've shot themselves in the face. They've got to accept that they were just way off base and had no friggin' idea what they were talking about when they did all of this 40 years ago.
What makes
and it trickles down to the ground to you.
Right.
You can't even get rid of, plain, clean biomass.
I struggled to just do a simple little tree job on Walnut Avenue that we suddenly can't take down a diseased tree because of permits. Are you kidding me with these people? Mm-hmm. I'm so angry about and frustrated. Look, during last year's fire, a buddy of mine calls me up and he says, hey, we need to clear this area. Can you come out here and do it? So we're out there. We're spinning we're knocking dry grass down. Everything's going good. All of a sudden, this group of, I don't know who they were, UCSC students says, hey, you guys got to stop that. This is a butterfly habitat. Are you kidding me with this? I'm on a job right now where I got held up for a week because, somebody on the board wanted to hold the thing up and, say that I was going to disturb the environmental habitat. Look, the problem I got with these people, okay, none of what they say makes sense, okay? Here's why. Because when these fires come through, all that environmental habitat burns to the ground.
Including,
by clearing it.
Including the animals.
Thank you very much. I got people telling me not to clear Poison Oak because it's a wood rat habitat. Are you kidding me with that? When that stuff burns, all those first responders got to go to the, ER because they're inhaling that stuff.
We have,
so I'm
we have a zoo sanctuary on our 160 acres up in the middle of this Dixie Fire. I've been talking about the property. We've got deer crawling all over it. We've got flocks of turkeys. They've got nothing for miles to live in now besides this little strip of us for about a mile along the railroad tracks where we'd done some back burning to prevent the town from burning, which didn't help. But if you can imagine what's this fire now? 1,000 square miles or more? It's 800,000 acres. I forgot what an acre. I think an acre is 640. No, a square mile is like 600 and something acres. Whatever it is. All of you sensitive people out there about Mother Nature and the damage we were going to do to clear out a dead tree or to do some defensible space around a house. It all sounds great until you see what happens if you don't do it.
Well,
and your losses are orders of magnitude above whatever was going to happen in this little clearing project. And to tell you the truth, the whole spotted owl thing's a farce. They finally found more spotted owls in the replanted managed forest than they found in the old growth forest. But that just got swept under the carpet, and nobody made an issue about it. Now we're off to yellow-bellied frogs and yellow-spotted frogs and salamanders and butterflies. And
here's my point about that. All right, I got three perspectives. Look, if you people care so much about butterflies and all that, go start a butterfly farm somewhere, okay? You can't hold guys like me up from doing a task of saving, homes from these devastating fires. The other part is, even with the 100 feet of defensible space, all right, like Mr. Wattenburg here is talking about, all right, you've got a thing that happens when, first of all, they start their own weather systems, all right? Secondly, what people need to understand is combustion. These things are so hot, there's so much heat coming off of these things, it causes combustion. So even if you have 50 feet, 100 feet, you're still vulnerable for, combustion. And that brings me back to the goat thing. When these fires happen, you need to be able to get these, animals out of that harm's way. Otherwise, they're going to fry up in combustion. They're going to be, vulnerable. And so, we don't have time for goats, and they're expensive. The whole process is pretty pricey. I love goats. The goats are beautiful in terms of when a guy like me comes in and clears all that off, the next season in spring, perfect time to bring them in. The vegetation is very soft and very edible. They can clear an area off in no time at all. But the initial clearing part, really, their jaw strength just really, they can't chew that. Yeah.
They don't eat sticks.
Thank you very much. Horses do. They're a forager, but even their jaw strength.
Yeah, they're not going to crunch up sticks and trees.
Yeah, but they're going to go to what's going to be easiest available food source to them, right? If they start fighting with one of those sticks, they're moving on. They're going to something else that's soft and more edible. Okay, that's the reality of the whole livestock theory. Okay, we need to have, instead of relying on jaw strength, we need to be relying on mechanical chipper strength. All right? That's the reality. Okay?
And we'll get out of the forest one of these decades. When the job's done and it's back in a balance, we'll get out. We'll be just as happy as everybody else to have nice, well-managed forests that look like the Black Forest in Germany. Somebody commented on, what does Europe do? But, yeah, they've been managing their forests for thousands of years. And they just don't have the climate and the forests that we have. I mean, the western United States it was blessed with, just fantastic forests, but it's rapidly burning up, and you're going to have nothing but brush-covered hills for the next 100 years now. So
let me say three things. One, I've got some brilliant ideas. Haven't been a guy that's boots on the ground. I've got some really good ideas on creating protocol machinery, okay? I need to get with some engineers and discuss the problem with what we're facing here in the Santa Cruz. We've got some of the steepest slopes in the entire country, okay? That's the difficulty. If it was flat out here, you run a high weed mower, no problem. The difficulty is the terrain, and it's loaded with poison oak. And most people, one, can't even get on the terrain. Two, once they get out there, they start getting poison oak, they're done. Okay, so I've been gifted with, the ability to not, I'm totally immune to the stuff. I swim in it and not get a speck on me, all right? Matter of fact, I'm on my way to Ben Lillman right after this broadcast and go haul a poison oak thing, which I can't dump because it's going to run past the time frame of, and I'm going to be stuck in, the Ben Lomond dump line, and it's just not even going to be. But I'm going to have to sit with this poison oak in the back of my truck till Monday morning, okay? So just to give you guys an idea of what problems and troubles I'm having, and so, if I said, hey, I was going to be at this job, or I try and take care of this stuff, one of the problems is I'm spending more of my time.
And your hydrocarbon fuel.
Exactly, okay? Stuck behind the wheel of a truck instead of physically boots on the ground in these areas that I need to be spending more time in. Instead of, I'm under the time gun of, dumps closing at 3:30. There's 5 hours left of sunlight. Come on.
The dump is never the place it should have ended up in the first place.
Right.
And because of all the environmental regulations, people couldn't build cogen plants that would burn this stuff off, make a fuel out of it, because by gosh, that stinking plant makes a little bit of smoke.
Well, here's
we can clean up the smoke. They have scrubbers now, which you see coming out of the latest cogen plants that burn biomass. It's a white cloud of steam, of water. Now, what is wrong with that compared to the forest fires?
Well, yeah.
So let's just get off our duff, change some policies, get new people in place that are going to do something to benefit all of us.
Yeah, let's get off our duffies.
I know, get off our duff.
No pun intended.
Duffies.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm trying to get off my duff, okay? So the funny part is, I need, just people to listen to some common sense. I'll give you an example. All right,
Duffy, we're almost at the end of the show.
I know. I've got time. I got a couple minutes. I'm just going to give you a quick example. When I listen to these environmental type of people, all right, and I listen to them, and then I say to them, hey, well, do you even know what a chainsaw brake is? No. What's that? That's what stops the chain when you're sliding down a muddy hillside and the chain's still spinning and it's right up against your face. That's how you stop it, is with the chainsaw brake. Most of these people that are wielding all this power, they don't even know what one of those is. So I'm so angry. I apologize. Trying to speak to the stuff.
It's time for a wholesale change. If we got to start with the governor, that's fine. But it is time for a wholesale change on the management of our public and private lands. If we don't do it, you can just kiss it all goodbye, and it's going to look like Silicon Valley when we're all finished.
Oy vey. That's all I can say.
Duff, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Nice to you.
Wow. And gee, Eric, great to have you back. And got to do it again.
Not a stitch about medicine today.
I know. And thank you, Duffy, for showing up when you did.
I want to head up to this Wattenburg property now.
That's all, folks.
You're listening to KSCO.